Hey, Tati here, and I'm excited to be here with Tim Davis. So, Tim Davis has been a science educator and coach for over 20 years, and he is the author of Tripolar, the story of a bipolar triathlete. He's also been married for over 24 years with three children, and he's a big advocate for mental health and physical fitness and their connectedness. So, he has been in recovery for over 14 years and also competing and coaching in triathlons and endurance races for over 2 decades. He's completed over 12 Ironman triathlons, seven 100-mile endurance runs, and many other endurance races, and he prefers to lead by example. So I'm excited to have Tim here to talk more about his experience and his journey with mental health as well as with exercise. So thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me, Tati. When you read that whole intro, that makes me tired just listening to it.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. What
Yeah.
got you into, I guess, to get started, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey and what got you into talking about mental health and also into the journey of being in all of these triathlons and races and exercise?
Okay. Yeah. Well, being into mental health, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 27, and I wasn't happy about that. And I didn't really talk about it a lot until, except for with close family members and a few close friends, for almost 19 years, until I wrote the book last year. And then I realized that I was revealing all my deep, dark secrets to the world. And then through the book writing process, I learned once I finish it, writing, I talked to other authors. They're like, your book has to have a platform. So then I was reflecting on what the platform for my book was, and it's mental health awareness and advocating for mental health.
Mhm. That's great. So it sounds like you wrote the book and then afterwards it turned into like becoming an advocate for mental health because that was a big part of your story.
Yeah, that was my point. I kind of tore the band-aid off with the book and realized I kind of got to stop hiding behind it. It's 2021. Most people are aware of how important mental health is. And I mean, I guess there are still some stigmas, but I don't feel like they're as bad as they used to be, going each decade back further or generation back as it is now. So
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think the stigma is still somewhat there, but I think it's gotten a lot more like people are more comfortable speaking about mental health, which I think is great. But at the same time, I think it takes a lot of courage to talk about it. So was that difficult for you to talk about your story?
yeah, I mean, obviously I kept it, like I said, just to close family members and friends for almost 19 years before I wrote the book. And then kind of realized, well, I guess I am, if enough people buy the book, I'm telling the world. So,
hmm hmm
but,
So yeah, no, go ahead.
yeah, it's getting a lot easier. I mean, I've done a lot of therapy, a lot of 12-step work, and I've been on over 40 podcasts now. So I've gotten really comfortable talking about it. So,
hmm Great. So, what was your journey like? What was the point where you realized that you needed to make a change and started to work on, because I know you had mentioned being in recovery. And so, recovery from your addiction, as well as transitioning into becoming more into like exercising.
but the point was when I had kids. I didn't know it, but I had been self-medicating my bipolar disorder from a very young age. I started using drugs and alcohol when I was 8 and 9 years old. I know it's really young, but I had
hmm
a brother who was 4 years older than me. So when he was 12 and 13 and getting into things, he just, let his little brother join right along. And I wanted to be cool like the big kids. So it was innocent then, but, it progressed and, became a daily thing in college and after college, and a lot in high school. And, I kind of went through the series of telling my wife to be. We started dating freshman year in college. I told her I'd quit when we graduated from college. I told her I'd quit when we got married, we got real jobs. I told her I'd quit when we get married. I told her I'd quit when she got pregnant. I told her I'd quit when the baby arrived. I kept putting off that due date of me quitting. We started couples therapy. And every time it was my turn to talk, and then the therapist kind of broke down her advice to me. Her advice was I need to go to 12-step programs, and I just wasn't ready to quit. And I started creating more and more wreckage in my life. And it was after going through a few rehabs that I, had the diagnosis of bipolar, and I'd been seeking help. I just hadn't fully surrendered. In the 12-step program, they say you got to surrender to win. And I hadn't fully accepted, being an alcoholic and an addict. And then when I got diagnosed bipolar, it took me a while to accept that. But I did a lot of research and reading and started going to meetings. And finally, after beating myself up a lot, I surrendered and started doing the things I needed to do for my self-care, to recover, to go through the steps. I saw a therapist for 5 years, been through the 12 steps several times, actually. Once you finish the 12 steps, by the way, you're not done. You just start them all over again. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that's interesting how you pointed out, like, even the process of accepting whether it's an addiction or a diagnosis or any mental health struggle, that's a process as well of accepting that this is what you're struggling with. And I've heard that a lot in my audience, that, they are grateful to have discovered that they're struggling with whether it's a specific diagnosis or a term like high functioning anxiety, which is what I talk about a lot, that they're grateful to have discovered it so that they can know what to do and how to treat it. But then at the same time, it's difficult to feel defined by a label. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are about that struggle.
Oh, that struggle was real. When I first got diagnosed bipolar, I didn't know anything about mental health. I was 27, and even like about AA, I didn't know anything about the 12-step program. I thought all alcoholics were Skid Row bums. I started going to these 12-step rooms, and there's doctors, lawyers, engineers, and all types in there. They're not just the homeless people that are asking for change. But that was my stigma that I believed. And the same thing with bipolar disorder. I thought that everybody who was diagnosed bipolar were like just mentally insane, like the loony guy you see on the street, kind of talking to himself or saying just gibberish. And I was wrong about that too. But when I first diagnosed it, I thought it meant I was crazy, and then I was very upset. It took me a while to accept it. The thing that really helped was reading articles and books, by NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and the NIH, and just doing a lot of research and reading up on it. And I came to learn that a lot of, very famous people in politics, entertainment industry, all arenas, business, entrepreneurs, have bipolar disorder and other mental health issues, and we're still relatively high functioning. So that gave me some peace of mind, knowing that, I can't think of all the names and I don't want to break their anonymity, but, former presidents, a lot of people, names you've heard. And so that was like, oh, well, these guys were able to deal with it, and all the success they had, it gave me confidence that I could, eventually overcome it, or at least kind of manage it, and be stable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's great that that was helpful for you to educate yourself and to realize that I think with anything, it's on a spectrum, even within certain diagnoses or mental health struggles, that, there are the people who are having difficulty and, aren't able to function as well in their day to day. And there's people who are able to be really successful and do well. And, I think like anything, like it goes on that spectrum.
For sure. I learned that about bipolar. I'm a type 2 bipolar rapid cycler. So I kind of go through lows and highs of the course of the day. The meds kind of stabilize a little bit, but there's still a little bit of a roller coaster. It's not a huge roller coaster. And, depression and anxiety go hand in hand with bipolar. They're two of the kind of major symptoms we deal with, especially the anxiety. I deal with that on a daily basis. It just kind of goes up and down. And, exercise has helped a lot, because the meds alone don't really reduce the anxiety all the time. So that's kind of when I really found stability, is when I started using a regular exercise program to help manage the anxiety that is coupled with my bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find that exercise helps you?
I'm working at elementary school right now, but I've been a high school teacher the last 16 years. Anyway, so some days are stressful with the kids, especially this time of year, because we only have a few days of school left. And so they're really getting excited for summer. So they're antsy and full of energy, and not wanting to really focus on their studies right now. So when I have tough days or tough times, a lot of times maybe I'm too busy, or there's not a 12-step meeting happening right now, but I can always put on my running shoes, or, do exercise. For me, getting into triathlons, I could get to the pool or get to the bike. Running is always my instant default. In my car, I always keep 2 pairs of running shoes and, change of clothes and my headphones and my running watch and everything. And I'm pretty much always ready to go running anywhere, anytime, just in case I need to, because sometimes, just getting out there and doing 5 miles makes me feel so much better. And kind of just helps me calm down, and then I can focus on everything else and be more productive again and at peace.
Yeah, I think running and any form of exercise can be really helpful for mental health. And I know that something that a lot of people struggle with is getting that motivation or creating a routine when it comes to sticking to exercise. Do you have any tips for that or anything that has helped you if that's something you've struggled with?
Yeah, I know actually it is something I struggle with. When I first finally got sober, I gained 60 pounds in my first year and a half of sobriety. And I remember it was December 31st, 2008. I stepped on the scale and I weighed 250 pounds, and I'm only 5'9". I'm not some 6'10" guy, what that might be a healthy weight for. And I hated that I was wearing double XL jerseys. And I just made a commitment to stop eating seconds, start going to the gym every day, and I keep an exercise log. And I just started writing down in this little notebook the exercise I did every day. I mean, now I do it on a Google spreadsheet, but this was
Mhm.
2009. And, at first it was just 1 mile and I couldn't even run it, and I was a track runner in high school. I used to run sub 5 minute miles, but, on January 1st, 2009, at 250 pounds, it took me 12 minutes to do a mile. And, I was a little depressed, but I was more angry. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get closer to those high school times I used to knock out. And, after 6 months, I lost 60 pounds and I was able to run a 6 minute mile again, not a 5 minute mile, but still that was, 6 minute miles pretty fast for most people. So I was
Yeah.
happy with that. And I just got into it, and still to this day, 12 years later, I record the exercise I do every day, how many yards I swim or how many miles I bike, and, the kind of other weight routines I do with planks and push-ups and pull-ups and other stuff that I do for resistance training.
Okay. So it sounds like your motivation was that like you weren't feeling happy with your appearance and how you felt. And so you decided to make that change for your health.
Yeah, finally. I kind of been yo-yoing with my weight for a while and just been heavy for a while and just depressed about it, and just finally made a commitment to do something different. And losing the weight really made me feel good. And now I'm kind of afraid of ever getting fat again. So I keep exercising and I watch the scale. And if it goes above 195, I know I got to start watching what I eat. And usually I stay between 185, 195 now.
Okay. And so have you managed any struggles along the way when it comes to training for these races that you're in or, continuing to manage any of the symptoms that you experience with your mental health?
Well, I wouldn't say with my mental health, except for maybe in the last year or two, I've kind of had a little I would say burnout, because I've been doing really long endurance races. And I don't know if it's the pandemic. I think this even started before the pandemic for me, but for like a good solid 10 years, I was just always about going to do the next race, the next longest race, the next biggest challenge. And the last year, I'm doing these 100-mile races. I've DNF'd at my last two 100-mile races, and which means did not finish. And I
Mhm.
was just really depressed about not finishing the race. But all my friends are like, some of my ultra friends are like, well, if you haven't DNF'd at a race, you just haven't done enough ultra races. And my family are like, most people don't even try to run 100 miles. So just like my mentality around my success or lack of success of that has been something I've had to manage, which most people are like, why would you even want to manage that? But I've completed 7 of them. I've tried 11 of them, and I'm happy that my completion percentage is still above 50%. And again, like most people wouldn't even try and do this. They think it's crazy to think about running 100 miles. So just dealing with my mental health around that has been a thing. And various physical injuries have kind of maybe to either step back or stop running here and there from plantar fasciitis or arthritis in my knees and other issues. But usually when that happens, I just go to more cross training and I just hit the pool and hit the bike. Luckily I've never had an injury that's kept me from biking or swimming and other cross training. So.
Mhm. Yeah, and so it sounds like things that you're hearing from a lot of people are that like, these are really long races and the fact that you're finishing, you said 50% of them, I think that's a great accomplishment. Um, would you consider yourself to have high expectations for yourself or like be a high achiever when it comes to seeking out these really long races and big goals?
Yes, definitely. I like to set big goals and I like to conquer them. And I was very driven in my 30s when I first got sober and first got into triathlons, and still pretty driven in my 40s, setting personal records. But now I'm turning 47 in a few days and getting close to 50. And I'm going back and forth between like, well, you're definitely not going to get any faster at this age.
Hmm.
And just being happy with being able to get out there and finish. And I've really glommed onto trail running the last, 5 years since I've gotten to ultra racing. And I just love any time I can get out to be out in the mountains, even if it's only for 5 miles. Because it's just I get a peace and serenity from running in the mountains and amongst the trees and with the birds and squirrels and sometimes bears and snakes and whatever else is out there, and just being with nature is great. So
Hmm. Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And I think especially nowadays where people are getting less of that because people are indoors more, spending time on technology. Um, what would you say is like if you had any advice or your experience when it comes to balancing that desire to get out and exercise along with responsibilities, of course, of work and other things, and the relationship that we have with technology now.
wow, I think it's very important to unplug. Um, no matter what your fitness level is, you should be trying to do at least 30 to 60 minutes of some form of exercise every day, even if it's just walking or whatever you can do. um, it's so good for your, obviously your physical well-being, but your mental health and your spiritual health. And just to unplug from our devices. I know, especially in this Zoom era, we're all on our screens all day. So I just can't wait to be able to get outside and get outdoors, because I've only needed these glasses in the last year from looking at a screen all day. So for me, I look forward to that time where I can just unplug and get away and not look at a screen and let my eyes rest. So
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, and it's definitely been a bigger change in this past year, like you're saying, with everybody looking at screens all day.
yeah. Yeah, it's been rough on the kids too. I really feel bad for them. The learning loss is huge.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So would you say, when it comes to your recovery, are there any things that have been helpful for you? I know you had mentioned the 12-step program. Are there any day-to-day habits other than exercise that have been helpful for you to maintain that sobriety and maintain a healthy routine?
Oh yeah. First and foremost is prayer and meditation. I start my day with a few short prayers, and I end my day with a few short prayers. And the 12 steps is the serenity prayer, the third step prayer, the 7-step prayer, the lay aside prayer, and just to kind of go through a gratitude list in my head each night before I go to sleep. Take some time to meditate here and there when needed. Definitely at least 5 to 10 minutes every day of just sitting still meditation. I also feel like I meditate while I'm exercising, because a lot of times I kind of get into this Zen state, when I'm out there running or cycling or swimming, where I'm just kind of just going and my head clears. And, it's one of the things I love about exercising is a lot of times there's like some problem I'm trying to solve with it, be like how to teach a better lesson or what to do with maybe my teenage children or whatever it is. And it'll come to me when I'm out there exercising and I'm like, oh yeah, I should try this. And then sometimes I'll stop and write it down on my phone or type it on my phone real quick. But when I get home, I'll make sure and then I'll do that. So it's been great that way. And the other thing I do as far as action is I have an action team in my 12-step program, and I call my action buddies every day. So phone calls and staying connected with people in the program. And I sponsor guys, and I'm busy with that on a weekly basis. Just staying connected. Those are all things that I do daily.
Great. Yeah. So it sounds like you mentioned some spiritual practices, meditation, exercise, and having that community and that support from your program. And, I think what you had mentioned is really important. Like you said, that sometimes when you're going for a run or when you're out, that's kind of like a meditation, or you'll have things come to you. And from what I've read about studies that have been done on the relationship between exercise and mental health, they've actually shown that they did a study with actually, I think it was high school kids, where they went in the morning and they did two groups where one group was running before school and the other group wasn't, and they gave them a test in the morning, and the
Mhm.
group that ran before actually performed better. And so I think exercise studies show that it actually improves your cognitive function, and I think it also gives you that space to solve problems mentally, because there's not like that effort of trying to do something, and your brain, I think, is just processing things along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard of that study and other studies similar to that. And I even noticed for me, on the days that I actually go for a run or do some exercise in the morning before work, that I feel more productive and like I can think more clearly when it comes to problem solving or other analytical situations, versus, waiting till later in the day to get the workout in.
Hmm. And would you say now that you're at a point where like you crave running and it's something that's easy for you to do, or do you ever have those moments where like, I should get a run in today, but I'm not really feeling motivated, and it's more of like you feel like you're forcing yourself to do it?
For the most part, I feel pretty driven to get out there and do something every day. There are some days where I don't feel like it. And most of those days I just force myself to do. For me, running, like, I don't feel like it's worth going for a run unless I'm doing at least 5 miles. So there are several days where I just do 5 miles, as opposed to doing more than that. And then, I don't want to do it. I get my running shoes on. I don't want to get out there. I start slow and then I finally get going. And sometimes I'm even checking my watch the whole time. Oh, 1.3 miles. God, I still got 3.7 to go, but other times I just kind of get through it or listen to music or listen to a podcast,
Mhm.
or audiobooks. And I always feel better after I finally get those 5 miles done, no matter what the pace is. So
Mhm. Okay, so it sounds like even if you don't feel like it, you're continuing with that habit because it's going to help you to feel better afterwards.
for the most part, yeah, I try to give myself one rest day a week, but usually that's like a swim day or a really light day.
Mhm. Okay. And would you say, is there any, I know this might be a tough question, but is there any one thing that has been really helpful for you throughout your journey and, when it comes to recovery and coping with your mental health? Like, would you say there's one thing that you would recommend for the listeners?
Well, I think the one thing I would recommend, that seems to be our theme, is exercise. For me, I was working the 12 steps and trying to take care of my spiritual component. I was seeing my psychiatrist and trying to take care of my mental component and getting educated about it. But I was still having higher levels of depression and anxiety. And, I was taking my meds and I was trying to work the steps but it's still just feeling, um, mood swings were more rapid. And it wasn't until I actually started exercise and working on the physical component, they say in the AA, we have a disease of a threefold nature, and I just think all of us need to take care of our spiritual self, physical self, and mental self. And it was once I started regularly exercising that I really felt pretty stable, and my life became much better. Everything was stable. My recovery grew. I was able to keep the same job for a long time. Before I got sober, I was never at the same work site or workplace for more than 2 years. There were a handful of years that were really rocky for me, periods of unemployment and depression. And that was, in my mid to late 20s before I, like when I got the bipolar diagnosis and was very unstable. But yeah, doing the exercise really, it was a missing piece I discovered that helped me kind of balance everything.
Mhm. Yeah, it sounds like that was really helpful for you. And I think that's something a lot of people don't think about is that mind body connection. I think there can be a lot of focus on like the mental and getting help in those ways, but not necessarily integrating your body into just that treatment of the day to day and helping your mental health.
Yeah, I agree totally. I wish I would have glommed onto that sooner because I had some of the medical specialists and psychologists and psychiatrists, that I was seeing tell me I should exercise more, but I was in such a bad place. I was overweight, out of shape, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. The thought of exercise was like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I even try to run a half mile.
Mhm.
So it took me a while to get there, but yeah, I said when I hit 250, it's in my head. I'm a math and science guy. I was like, wow, that rounds up to 300. And I'm like, I don't want to hit 300, and end up on that show, The Biggest Loser or something. And so that was kind of the turning point, breaking point for me, where I was
Mhm.
like, all right, we got to commit. We got to do what we knew how to do in high school when I played a lot of sports. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say that that was, because I know a lot of people talk about like they hit like a rock bottom point and then it's kind of that point where they realize that they need to make a change. Do you think that's what it was like for you, where you reached this point of whether you want to consider it like rock bottom or just some catalyst that inspired you to make that change?
Definitely rock bottom as far as, where my physical health was at, because I was also diagnosed pre-diabetic, and I was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. I was very unhealthy. Just finally got sober, and recovering from the aftermath of doing not just alcohol, but a lot of more illicit drugs too, because I'm definitely, drug addiction was a big part of my problem. But the rock bottom was really, after I burned through one more job, crashed one more car. I had been doing a lot of hardcore drugs, and finally surrendered to not wanting to cause any more wreckage in my life. That's when that rock bottom happened.
If there's somebody that's at a point where they're struggling with their mental health and they're finding that it's hard to get motivated, whether it's to exercise or to get help or to integrate any healthy habits, what advice would you have for them?
I guess my first piece of advice would be start slowly, start with baby steps. Like for me, it was just trying to run 1 mile when I weighed 250 pounds. So even if, try to walk around the block, whatever you can do, or whatever exercise you like to do for, 5, 10, however many minutes you can do the first time out there. And then just try to add a little bit, each week, just to increase it by a few minutes or another quarter mile or half mile each week, depending on what your sport or exercise you're doing. And just, don't beat yourself up. And just be persistent, and keep that exercise log. That really helps me, because I look at my training plan, I track my progress, and I know what I need to do, what I should be doing, whether it's been a good week, bad week, and at my age, we do a hard day and a light day, because I'm not as young as I used to be, where I just did hard long days every day. Now I got to give my body some physical recovery time too, if I want to consistently perform well in the races that I do. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great feedback or advice to start with baby steps. And like you said, keeping a log and being consistent with it so that, I think that log can help with accountability and to help to keep you motivated.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're lucky, maybe you could find a running buddy. I have a lot of running buddies, although in the pandemic we haven't been running together as much.
Mm.
And actually, I prefer to run by myself most of the time. Although for some of my long runs, I do like to chum up with some of my buddies. Just getting through the long runs by yourself sometimes is mentally challenging more than physically challenging. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that could be the case when it comes to exercise. A lot of times they say that like your mind is gonna go way before your body does.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that yourself in like those longer races that you do?
That my mind's going before my body does.
Yeah, like your
Oh
mind's
yeah.
telling you I need to stop way before your body
Oh yeah,
does.
all the time. I've read lots of books on dealing with that, and sometimes I'm really good at it. One of the books I liked is called The Ultra Mindset. Um, I don't know if I should bring this up, but sometimes I put on David Goggins' podcast when I'm thinking about quitting. I don't know if you're familiar with David Goggins,
No.
but he's like labeled the world's toughest man. He's like a 3-time Navy SEAL, and he cusses like a sailor, so I wouldn't play him in front of my students. But he's like this hardcore, Navy guy, and so when I think about quitting, I just listen to him for a little bit, and I'm like, oh, I can't quit. I gotta try and be tough like this guy.
All right. Yeah, I'll look him up and I'll leave a link to his you said it's a podcast that he has?
I don't know if he's on a bunch of podcasts. I know he's on the Joe Rogan show, and if you said get David Goggins Motivation, he's been on several other podcasts. He's got his own website.
Yeah.
He's also started this 4x4x48 challenge that they did it I think last year, and I just did it in March, where you try to run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours, because he's an ultra runner guy. He also holds the world record for the most pull-ups in a day. He did like 4,150 pull-ups in one day. So he just done all kinds of crazy stuff and all kinds of crazy races, and he motivates and inspires a lot of people that are into any kind of working out, ultra racing or other things, Spartan races, all that stuff. So.
Great. So I'll leave a link to him in the show notes. And I think that can be helpful to, like you're saying, having a buddy or an accountability buddy to motivate you. And then also listening to people that you look to as like a mentor or somebody that can help to inspire you or keep you motivated to keep going.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
So I know that you have a book called Tripolar, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Yeah, I wrote the book, published it July 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. And so I've been doing a virtual book tour, going on all these podcasts. And the title Tripolar comes from me being bipolar and then becoming a triathlete. So bipolar triathlete, tripolar. Yeah, three is the holy number. I mean, there's three sports in triathlon, and there's the three parts of yourself that you need to take care of: your physical, mental, and spiritual self. So it just kind of all tied into me together. And it's a memoir. It kind of goes in three parts. My childhood, some trauma issues that I dealt with. At age 13, my dad died. He fell off a balcony while he was chasing me. And some family members blamed me for causing his death, even, and at the time I thought it was my fault, which kind of led me further into my addiction before I got therapy for it 20 years later. So it talks about the childhood trauma, being blamed for my dad's death, and finally, and then like the next kind of part is going deep into addiction, and then finally getting sober and recovering, and then the last kind of third of the book talked about doing the triathlons and the ultra racing, and it's kind of some race war stories with some of the big races I've done for those people that are into competition. I know my fellow ultra runner friends and triathlete friends enjoy those chapters, talking about my Ironman races and some of these 100-mile races and some other, the double Ironman race I did. They like that kind of stuff, the race or the war stories at your races, what you did to get through it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. And, that sounds like a really difficult experience that you had in your childhood of losing your dad and being blamed by your family for his death. And then, like you said, going into that addiction and then coming out being a competitive athlete, and triathlete. So I think that's a really inspirational story.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, being blamed for his death was hard, and it took me 20 years to realize it wasn't my fault, and 5 years of therapy and getting sober and all that. But now I'm out there racing, and I dedicate all my races to my father and the memory of him, and and to my little brother who also died from alcoholism 3 years ago at age 32. The disease of alcoholism and addiction runs deep on both sides of the family, and I'm just blessed to be one of the ones who actually got sober. Because there's some other people that still kind of have some issues, but and I think every family probably has one person in it or connected to it somehow that might have issues with alcoholism or addiction. So
yeah, it is very common, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And
So I'm just trying to be the sober example for fellow family members and anybody else that I cross paths with.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And, let's say if there's anybody who's listening who's struggling, whether they're self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, or they're in a place where maybe they feel like they're struggling with alcoholism, would you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I would say easy does it. All the 12-step cliches, one day at a time. Get a sobriety date and don't change it. I know when I was first getting sober, I used to go to this meeting in Burbank. I live in Southern California. And there was this one guy who used to always say, get a sobriety date and don't change it. And my first big book had all of these sobriety dates in it, because I'd get 3 months sober, I'd relapse. I'd get like 6 months sober, I'd relapse. The disease would say, you could probably have one drink. It was never just one drink. And so I had like 10 different sobriety dates in there. And I'm like, yeah, this guy's right. This guy is right. I need to get a sobriety date and stop changing it. And just, go to a 12-step meeting with an open mind, go to an open meeting. They suggest go to 6 different meetings, 6 different ones, not the same meeting 6 times to kind of see, because there's speaker meetings, they're just sharing meetings. There's lots of different formats for the meetings, and find the ones you like. And another thing we say in the 12-step program is, take what works for you and leave the rest behind, because you're going to hear a lot of opinions in there too, but people are actually talking about the principles in the big book. Go on to that, read the big book. But those would all be, starter points for people who are thinking about trying to get sober. I think the 12-step program is the most successful program out there, but there's no real statistics on things out there. But from to my knowledge, it seems to be the most successful way of helping people, millions of people who got sober with 12-step programs.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And I like that point of take what works for you and leave the rest, because I think that can be really important, because not everything is going to work for everybody.
For sure. I know when I first came into the 12-step rooms, here's another thing, look for the similarities and not the differences. When I first started going to meetings, I was looking for the differences and not the similarities, because I didn't want to be like those losers. And and so I wasn't ready to get sober, and I had a handful of more relapses to go through because I wasn't looking for the similarities. So look for the similarities, not the differences, and glom onto that. So.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And do you have any other advice or anything else that you wanted to share today?
One last thing, my spiritual advisor, my sponsor, always says, I'm responsible for my second thought and my first action. Because a lot of times, not just for bipolar alcoholic addicts, but I think for most people, the first thought that goes through your head might not be the best thought. So
Mm.
breathe, take a deep breath, have a second thought before you take any action on whatever that first thought might have been.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because I think that can be true. You can't always control the first thought that comes up, but then you can choose how to respond to it. And I think that can be applicable, like you said, with anybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being on Calmly Coping, and it was great speaking to you. And what I will do is I'll leave a link to your book below and your website. Is there anywhere where people can find you if they're interested in learning more about you?
Yeah, I have a website, ultratimdavis.com. My social media handles, Instagram is at ultratimdavis, and same on Facebook and Twitter. And the links are on my website too. That's probably the best way to find me.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Thank you for having me.